Number 1. My brother. My brother Jack was a pretty interesting guy growing up. He was a couple years older than I was. He and I didn't have the relationship that I noticed a lot of other guys had with their brothers. In fact, I really hardly knew my brother. When we were teenagers, we hardly ever even saw each other. He had fallen in with a pretty bad group of friends that my parents probably wouldn't have approved of. I say probably just because my parents rarely paid attention to anything past their own noses. Had they may have been able to prevent what happened. This happened during winter break at school. My parents had gone to my grandmother's house for Christmas. They were going to be there for a week. Neither Jack nor I had any interest in going, and my parents were not the kind of people who would press on something like that. We had money for food and rented the house for over a week. I was happy, spending time at home by myself. Jack did spend a little bit of time at home, but it really wasn't much. He went out the second day after my parents had left, and I didn't see him for several days. Again, this wasn't something that I was too overly concerned about. It was normal for Jack to just go and be gone for a while. I never really got concerned about it, but I did begin to get a little worried the night that we had a snowstorm. Jack's car was a rear-wheel drive car, and he wasn't really the best driver. So, as the snow began to fall lightly, and then very, very heavily, I began to start to hope that he was okay. And by the time it got dark out that day, the snow was falling, and it was beginning to accumulate. Before I knew it, a good foot of snow had fallen, and there was no sign of it stopping. I tried calling Jack, but as usual, his cell phone was off. He likely had let the charge run down, and it probably wasn't on for days. That wasn't abnormal. At about 11 at night, I decided to go and check on the snowfall. It was getting really, really high. But that wasn't what concerned me. What bothered me was I saw an old 1980s blue Ford Mustang LX sitting on the street in front of the house. And I knew that car, because it was my brother Jack's car. I squinted, trying to get a good look at the car. I thought maybe Jack was sitting in it, talking to a friend of his or something. Maybe he was waiting for me to turn the lights out so he could sneak someone into the house. But that didn't make sense, because Jack would never try and be that secretive. There was a little bit of snow on the car, so it had to have been sitting out there for a while. I went back and tried Jack's phone again. It was still off. I then went around the house and locked and bolted all of the doors. It seemed paranoid, all right, but for some reason I was very unsettled. Jack never parked out on the street. I began wondering if something had happened to him, and if someone had taken his car. And if they had his car, then they had his keys, and they could get into the house if the door was not bolted. I was so worried at that point that I walked around to all the windows and made sure they were locked too. Finally, after I was sure the house was secured, I went back to the front door and looked out. The car was still there. I turned on the lights to the front porch. I then had an idea, and I started flashing the front porch lights on and off again. I thought this was a good way to indicate to whomever was in the car, even if it was Jack, that not only was I awake, but I was aware they were there. I guess I was more scared than relieved when the car turned on, and it drove away slowly through the falling snow. The whole thing was weird, but I still didn't know what to believe. The following day, I got a call from the police. They found my brother's car flipped over in a ditch. 2 people were in the front seats of the car, and they were dead. Neither were my brother. The car had crashed in the storm shortly after I had seen it leave. We had no idea what had happened to my brother for nearly another 2 days. That was when he was found, half alive and beaten in a ditch. It took Jack nearly 2 months to recover and to tell us what had happened to him that night. He was on his way home when he picked up 2 hitchhikers in the snow. Once in the car, they mentioned being from out of town, and they had no place to go. Jack made the mistake of mentioning his parents were both out of town, and he actually offered them a place to sleep. They both pulled knives on him and threatened to cut his limbs off if he didn't pull the car over. They did, pulled him out, beat him, and stabbed him several times. They left him in a ditch to die. They must have used the registration in the glove box to find out where he lived. I guess he hadn't mentioned to me, but all I can suppose is that they were waiting for me to go to bed. Fortunately, my paranoia probably saved my life. A lot of that is speculation since we could never question them. I'm just happy that it wasn't Jack and me that died that night in the snowstorm. Number 2, the basement. I had a really bad relationship with my stepfather growing up. Short story, he was an ass. And my mom put up with it too. When I was 18, he was insistent that I move out of the house. Hell, I even had a semester left of high school and he didn't even care. The only thing that concerned him was that I was 18, and he felt that was enough to get rid of me. So I was gonna move out. It didn't work. My mom finally stood up to him and told him that they had to let me remain in the house until I graduated. The jerk finally relented, but he didn't want me sleeping in the house anymore. We had an unfinished basement, and he told me I had to move my bed and my belongings down there. It was awful for many reasons. First, it really wasn't a place anyone should live in. It had a concrete floor, some cinder block walls, and was right next to the crawl space. There was no heat and only one light bulb. The basement wasn't connected to the house by any door or anything. The door to the basement was in the back of the house, and it really wasn't very solid. But that was the only thing my mom could convince him to relent on. The worst thing about it all was that my birthday was in January. It was cold outside, and we had some very hard winters. So it snowed often and deep, and it was just awful. I was fortunate that when school started back up again, and my parents were going to be going out of town, my mom gave me a key to the house. If my stepdad would have had his way, I wouldn't have had access to the kitchen or the bathroom. He was worried I would be spending too much time in the house, watching TV or something. Hell, writing this angers up my blood so much. One day, when I was walking home from school, I knew that a storm was coming. I wanted to stay in the house, but realized that probably wasn't the best idea. So I did everything I had to do in the house, got downstairs, and tried to bundle myself in and read a book while it stormed outside. I'm not sure how late at night it was when I heard a really odd noise. It sounded like the floor above me was creaking. At first, I was able to dismiss it and assume it was only the house settling. But immediately afterward, I heard it again, and then again. and it was quite obvious that someone was walking around in the house. I immediately wondered if my parents had come home early, but I doubted that they would do that without telling me. There was someone in my house, and by the sounds increasing, it seemed like it was more than one. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to go up and confront whomever it was. Hell, that could get me killed. I quickly got up and made sure the basement door was locked. Then I turned off my light. I lay there in bed, wondering what would happen. I huddled under a blanket and I watched the window. After a while, I saw a pair of legs walk by my window. Someone was walking towards the basement door. I then heard someone grab the door and try to open it. However, the lock held. He shook the door, and then I heard him doing something with the doorknob. I was terrified and did the only thing I could think of to do. I jumped up and climbed into the crawl space. I hid behind a column of cinder blocks, and I lay there. It didn't take long for the person to pick the lock and get in. He turned on the lights, and fear gripped me when I saw he was carrying a baseball bat in his hand. He looked over, knocked a few things over. He did look into the crawl space a few times, but he didn't notice me. After what seemed like forever, he finally left. I didn't care. I remained in the crawl space until I heard no more footsteps in the house. Even after that, it took me a long time before I went into the house. The house was ransacked. So much was missing. I called the police and then my parents. My stepdad, being the asshole that he was, tried blaming me for the incident. He actually punched me in the face when I told him I had nothing to do with it and that he was a jackass. This was really the last straw with my mother. She finally kicked him out and moved me back into my old room. The robbers were never caught, and they scared me. But I guess, in a way, I'm thankful that they robbed us because my stepdad was finally out of our life. Number 3. Windstorm. It's warm outside. It shouldn't be warm in December. With most of the winters that I have been through in life, it's so weird knowing it's warm in December. Right now, there is a very strong wind. It's gotta be about 20 miles an hour. I keep wondering if maybe a really nasty storm is on its way, and that reminded me of what happened to me during a really nasty storm years ago. It's really hard to explain what this was like, since you weren't there. The atmosphere is something I'll have to convey, but I know it will be done rather poorly. I live in a house with 2 roommates. Both of them tend to go to bed really early, and I am more of a night owl. The winter that this story takes place, they were already in bed. I was sitting down and watching television and talking on my computer. It was dark, and that was the way I liked it. The wind was howling outside, like I hadn't heard it howl in who knows how long. I was working on my laptop when the lights shut off. The power was out. As usual, when the power goes out, I went over to the door and opened it, going out on the porch. I wanted to know if it was a breaker problem. It wasn't. The entire block, the entire neighborhood was dark. And I mean dark. I had never really seen anything like it, and not sure I ever knew what dark was until that moment. The wind was howling, and everything outside just looked dead and foreboding. I was a bit hypnotized by how interesting it all was. I'm not sure how long I stood out on the porch, taking in the strange, ambient neighborhood. However long it was long enough for me to feel something wet touch me in the face. It was snow. Although it was hard to see, I could feel it. And as it began falling harder, I was able to see it in front of me. I knew that this was going to be bad. And after watching the snow and wind for a bit, I decided that I should go in and see how much power I had left on my laptop. It might have been a good idea to see how my roommates were doing. My laptop was fine, and I heard nearly rhythmic snoring coming from the two bedrooms. Not knowing how long the power would be off, I decided to preserve my laptop battery, and I turned it off. I felt lured back outside, knowing that, as a storm lover, this sort of thing didn't happen often. I needed to go back outside and do my best to enjoy it. It was chilly, of course, so I grabbed my blanket, wrapped it around myself, and took myself out on the porch to watch the storm. I'm not sure how long I'd been sitting there that I noticed something. Across the street and 2 houses down, in a house in which I did not know the residents, I saw a quick and really strange flash of light. It was in one of the rooms. It was so quick and over so soon, but it caught my attention for that very reason. From that point on, I was unable to keep my eyes off of the house. I thought it had to be something harmless at first, like perhaps they had a lantern that they tried lighting but it failed. I wasn't sure. But still, I wrapped the blanket more tightly around me as the snow began falling harder and harder. After about another 20 minutes, I saw someone coming out of the house. Again, it was so dark out that I was sure that he didn't know I was watching him, and I could barely see him myself. But he appeared to be carrying something, like a bag. He got into his car, and then he drove off slowly. I didn't know what to think about that, and actually didn't think anything about it at all. I mean, I started making up stories in my mind that something must have been going on, but I wrote it all up to my imagination. Not long after the guy drove away, I went inside and went to bed. I'm not sure when I woke up, and I don't know what woke me up. It was dark. The electricity was still off. Looking at my window, I could tell it was still snowing outside. I decided to get up and walk to the bathroom. I walked into the hallway and immediately froze when I saw a large man standing at the end of the hallway. He was only a shadow, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I didn't know what to do and really didn't have a chance to figure it out. Something hit me hard and felt like I had been hit by a car. And then I was lying on the ground. I watched as the guy walked over to me, and he knocked me hard upside the head, knocking me out. When I came to later, I was in the hospital because my roommates had called 911. My house was robbed, but at that moment I didn't care. I just felt awful. I had gotten a severe electric shock, not a taser mind you, that made me fall over, and I got a concussion from the blow to the head. Several houses on the street were robbed in a similar way that night. I guess it was the perfect time to do it, during a major power outage and a snowstorm. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I was trying to wait until it was actually winter to start doing these stories. But like so many of you, the scary winter stories are my favorite stories to do. So I couldn't help myself. And I hope you enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoyed reading them and recording them for you. I want to thank everyone who has been buying the Killer Orange Cat merchandise. My sister has sold a great many shirts, and that makes me happy. Apparently, I am getting a shirt for Christmas too, and I'm looking forward to knowing which one. I am gonna try and get some mugs and things like that as well, because some of you have asked for those. Now, if you want to see print versions of these stories, visit the Killer Orange Cat subreddit, where they have already been posted. Also, you can visit my sister's Killer Orange Cat merchandise store. She has an awesome Christmas sweater up right now. The links to both of these are in the description. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of the closing. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can follow Ichigo and me on Facebook and Twitter by using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, email it to the address included in the description. My only requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not been read on any other YouTube channel. In the meantime, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.